Alright guys, welcome back to English 2. Today we're going to be starting to read the last act of our play. So if you haven't already read or watched or listened to the audio, for pages 858 through 71, I would highly recommend you do that before you start reading here with me. We are going to be starting on page 72 today. We're going to be reading pages 72 through 80. And I have a nice little surprise for you. We're actually going to skip the first two pages. So we're going to be starting on page 74 today, if you're following along. There will be a question set to go with this assignment today, so make sure that you keep an eye out for that. And then just a couple quick reminders before we get started today. There will be a test over this unit next Tuesday. The prompt can be found in your Crucible section of Classroom, and I will be posting that on Saturday. You are welcome to do it early and turn it in, and then it'll be due no later than Tuesday. There will be a short quiz-like assignment on Monday. I haven't decided exactly what that's going to look like just yet, but I promise you that it will be quick and to the point, probably maybe 30 minutes, if not shorter. I'm definitely looking at things like Kahoot or Quizlet or something like that, just to gauge some understanding. Okay? Um, Without further ado, let's get started reading today. We are going to be starting on page 74, like I said. We're going to be skipping this weird scene between Sarah Good and Tituba, in which they're getting ready to be taken out to be hanged, and basically they've gone nuts. Tituba talks about how she's going to take Sarah Good to Barbados and things like that. And so it's just really strange. So we're going to start at the top of page 74 with a guy named Willard. And he says, "Good morning, Majesty. Your Honor, Judge, Deputy Danforth, all work for here." So he's just talking to Danforth. He says, "Good morning, Your Majesty." And Danforth says, "Where is Mr. Paris?" And Willard responds, "I'll fetch him." Danforth says, "Marshal, when did Reverend Hale arrive?" And Willard says, "It was towards midnight, I think." And Danforth says suspiciously, "What is he about here?" And if you remember from the last one, Dale, Hale actually quit the court at the end once they started accusing John Proctor of being a witch. All right. And so Willard says Hale, goes among them that will hang, sir, and he prays with them. He is actually sitting with Goody Nurse now. And he says, and Mr. Paris is also with Hale. And Danforth says, "Indeed, the man have no authority here, Marshal. Why have you let him in?" And then Willard says, "Well, Mr. Paris commanded me, sir. I can't deny it." So Hale is there because Paris allows it. Um, Willard says, "Why, Mr. Paris commanded me, sir. I cannot deny it." Danforth asks Willard if he's drunk. In the earlier scene, the pages that we skipped, he's just sipping out of something strong out of a cup. And Willard says, "No, sir. It's a bitter night, and I have no fire." And then Danforth says, "Fetch for Mr. Paris." And Willard goes and does that. And Danforth says, "There's a prodigious stench in this place. It smells real bad." Willard, stopping at the door, "I only have a few people cleared. I have only now cleared the people out for you." Danforth says, "Beware of hard drink, Marshal." Willard says, "Aye, sir." And then Hawthorne speaks. He says, "Let you question Hale, Excellency. I should not be surprised that he's been preaching in Andover lately." And Danforth says, "We'll come to that. Speak nothing of Andover. Paris prays with him. That's strange." Hawthorne says, "I think sometimes Paris has a mad look these days." Mad? Well, Danforth says, I met him yesterday, or Hawthorne says, "I met him yesterday coming out of his house, and I bid him good morning, and he cried, and went on his way. I think it is not well that the village sees him so unsteady." And Danforth says, "Perhaps he has some sorrow." And Cheever says, "I think it's the cows, sir." And Danforth's like, "The cows?" And then Cheever lays it out for us, because this is what Salem is like now. He says, "There be so many cows wandering the high roads now that their masters are in jail, and much disagreements about who they belong to. I know Mr. Paris be arguing with farmers all day yesterday. There is great contention, sir, about the cows." Then Danforth sits down. "Contention make him weep, sir. It were always a man that weep for contention." He turns, as do Danforth and Hawthorne. Hearing a man coming up the corridor, Danforth raises his head as Paris enters. He is gaunt, frightened and sweating. I think he's referring to Paris here. And then Paris says to Danforth, "Oh, good morning, sir. Thank you for coming. I beg your pardon for waking you so early. Good morning, Judge Hawthorne." Danforth says, "Reverend Hale, you have no right to enter this." Paris says, "Excellency, a moment." Hawthorne, "How do you leave him alone with the prisoners?" And Danforth says, "What's his business here?" Paris, prayerfully holding up his hands, "Excuse me, Excellency. It is a providence. Reverend Hale has gone to bring Rebecca Nurse to God." And Danforth says he bids her to confess, and Paris says, hear me. Rebecca had not given me a word these 3 months since she came. Now she sits with him, and her sister, and Martha Corey, and 2 and 3 others, and he pleads with them confess their crimes, save their lives. And Danforth is surprised to hear this. He says, why, it's indeed a providence. And they soften? They soften? And Paris says, not yet, not yet, but I thought to summon you, sir, that we might think on whether or not it'd be wise to. There's news, sir, that the court must reckon with. My niece, I believe she has vanished. And Danforth is surprised by this. He says, vanished. And Paris says, I thought I advised you earlier in the week, but Danforth is surprised. He's like, why? How long is she gone? And Paris says, well, this be the third night. Mercy Lewis is gone too. And Danforth says, alarmed, I'll send a party for them. Where may they be? And Paris responds, Excellency, I think they be aboard a ship. My daughter tells me now she heard them speaking of ships last week, and tonight I discovered my strong box broken into. It's like a bank. And Hawthorne's astonished. She's robbed you? And Paris says, 33 pounds gone. I'm penniless. And Danforth finally can't stand it anymore. He's like, Mr. Paris, you are a brainless man. All right. So unfortunately, that's what happens to Abby. She runs away. She causes all these problems. She tries to turn the town upside down for John Proctor, and she faces no real punishment for doing it. She just leaves, and that's it. That's the end of Abby. She doesn't get it. Nothing bad comes her way. She just runs away. So for those of you that were really hoping, beyond all hope, that she would somehow be punished, I'm very sorry. All right. Paris says, Excellency, a prophet, nothing you should blame me. I cannot think they would run off except the fear in Salem anymore, since the news of Andover is broken here. Well, and they're talking about a local town in which the situation is similar. It's a little bit like the lottery, where we have a conversation going on in a town, but there's talk of another town nearby. And so Danforth says, Andover is remedied. The court returns there on Friday and resume examinations. In Paris, I am sure of it, sir, but the rumor here speaks of rebellion in Andover, and Danforth strongly protesting, there is no rebellion in Andover. Paris says, I tell you what it's said here, sir. Andover have thrown out the court. They say they will have no part of witchcraft. There be a faction here feeding on that news, and I tell you, sir, I fear there will be a riot here. Okay, so the entire town has now turned against the witchcraft trials, all right? And Hawthorne says, riot? Why, at every execution I have seen naught but high satisfaction in the town. And Paris says, Judge Hawthorne, it were another sort that hanged till now. Rebecca Nurse is no Bridget, who lived 3 years with Bishop before she married him. John Proctor is not Isaiah Ward, who drunk his family to ruin. And then he says to Danforth, let Rebecca stand upon the gibbet and send some righteous prayer, and I fear she'll wake a vengeance on you. So Paris here is pointing out that the people that are hanging today are very different than the people that have hanged before. In his mind, the people that hang today are well respected within the community versus others, and so their deaths today could be a problem. Hawthorne says, Excellency, she is condemned a witch. The court have, and the Danforth, in deep concern, he raises his hand to Hawthorne. Pray you. And then he says to Paris, how do you propose then? Danforth says, there will be, Paris says, Excellency, I would postpone these hangings for a time. And Danforth says, there will be no postponement. And Paris says, now Mr. Hale's return, there is hope, I think, for if he brings even one of these to God, the confession surely damns the others in public eye, and none may doubt more that they are all linked to hell. This way, unconfessed and claiming innocence, doubts are multiplied. Many honest people will weep for them, and our good purpose is lost in their tears. He thinks that their deaths may undermine the case. And then Danforth says, Cheever, give me the list. And Cheever opens a dispatch case, and Paris says, I cannot be forgot, sir, that when I summoned the congregation for John Proctor's excommunication, which means he was banished from the church, that there were hardly 30 people that came. That speaks discontent, sir. And then Danforth says there's no postponement, so he's not going to hold off on these executions today. They're going to happen. And Paris says, Excellency. And Danforth says, now, sir, which of these, in your opinion, may be brought to God? I will myself strive him till dawn. And then he crosses to Cheever, who hands him the list. Paris says, there is not sufficient time until dawn. And Danforth says, I shall do my utmost. Which of them do you have hope for? And then Paris begins to, choke up. He's like, Excellency, a dagger. And Danforth says, what do you say? And Paris says, tonight when I opened my door to leave my house, a dagger clattered to the ground. You cannot hang this sort. There is danger for me. Once again, it's all about Paris. I dare not step outside at night. Hale enters. They look at him for an instant in silence. He is steeped in sorrow, exhausted, and more direct than he ever was. And Danforth says, accept my congratulations, Mr. Hale. We are gladdened to see you returned to your good work. Hale says, you must pardon them. They will not budge. So Hale is totally shifted here. He's gone from, I am so excited to be here because I want to find me a witch, and we're going to, like, kick butt, take names, kick the devil out of Salem. And, yeah, he's like, we can't do this. This is wrong. Danforth says, you misunderstand, sir. I cannot pardon these that are when 12 are already hanged for the same crime. He's like, I can't just take it back. I've already killed 12 people for this. And Paris says, Rebecca will not confess. Hale says, the sun will rise in a few minutes, Excellency. I must have more time. And then Danforth says, now hear me and charm yourselves no more. I will not receive a single plea for pardon or postponement. Them that will not confess will hang. 12 are already executed. The names of these 7 are given out, and the village expects to see them die at dawn. Postponement now speaks of floundering or weakness. And Willard enters. On my part, reprieve or pardon must cast doubt upon the guilt of them that died till now. When I speak God's law, I will not crack its voice with whimpering. If retaliation is what you fear, know this. I should hang 10,000 that dared to rise against the law, and an ocean of salt tears could not melt the resolution of those statutes. Now draw yourselves up like men, and help me, as you are bound by heaven to do. Have you spoken with them all, Mr. Hale? And then Hale says, all but Proctor. He's in the dungeon. Danforth says, what's Proctor's way now? And then Willard says in the doorway, drunkenly, well, he sits like some great bird. You'd not know he'd live, except he will take food from time to time. And Danforth thinks, his wife must be well on with child now. And Willard says, she is, sir. Danforth says, what think you, Mr. Paris? You have closer knowledge of this man. Might her presence soften him? Paris says, it is possible, sir. He have not laid eyes on her in those 3 months. I should summon her. Danforth to Willard, is he yet adamant? Has he struck at you again? So, as always, Proctor's out there, like, throwing hands. Willard smiles drunkenly. He cannot, sir. He is chained to the wall now. Says Danforth says, fetch Goody Proctor, so Mrs. Proctor to me, and let you bring him up. Willard says, aye, sir. Hail, Excellency, if you postpone a week, and publish to the town that you are striving for their confessions, that speak mercy on your part, not faltering. Mr. Hale, says Danforth, as God has not empowered me like Joshua, as God have not empowered me like Joshua to stop the sun from rising, so I cannot withhold from them the perfection of their punishment. And Hale, rising, crossed into the door. If you think God wills you to raise rebellion, Mr. Danforth, you are mistaken. And Danforth says, you've heard of rebellion in Salem? And Hale says, Excellency, there are orphans wandering from house to house. Abandoned cattle bellow on the high roads. The stink of rotting crops hangs everywhere. And no man knows when the harlot's cry, the harlot being Abby, will end his life. And you wonder yet if rebellion is spoke? Better you should marvel how they do not burn your providence. Danforth says, Mr. Hale, you have preached in Andover this month? And Hale says, thank God they have no need for me in Andover. Danforth says, you baffle me, sir. Why have you returned here? Hale says, why, it is simple. I have come to do the devil's work. I come to counsel Christians that they should lie. There is blood on my head. Can you not see the blood on my head? And Paris says, hush. They all face entrance. Willard and Elizabeth entered. Danforth, very politely, Goody Proctor, I hope you are hearty. Elizabeth says, I am but 6 months before my time. Danforth says, pray be at your ease. We come not for your life. Mr. Hale, will you speak with the woman? Hale says, Goody Proctor, your husband is marked to hang this morning. Elizabeth says, quietly, I have heard it. And Hale says, Hale, who finds it difficult to look at her, says, you know, do you not, that I have no connection with the court. I come of my own, Goody Proctor. She knows this to be untrue. I would save your husband's life, for if he is taken, I count myself as murderer. Do you understand me? What do you want of me? And the Goody Proctor says, Hale says, Goody Proctor, I have gone 3 months like our Lord into the wilderness. I have sought a Christian way for the damnation's double on a minister who counsels men to lie. Hale says, it is no lie. You cannot speak of lies. And Hale, who finally has had enough, he's like, it's a lie. These people are innocent. Danforth says, no more. I'll hear no more of that. But Hale continues to speak to Elizabeth and says, let you not mistake your duty as I mistook my own. I came into this village like a bridegroom to his beloved, bearing gifts of high religion, the very crowns of holy law I brought. And what I touched with my great confidence, it died. And when I turned that eye of great faith, blood flowed up. Beware, Goody Proctor. Cleave to no faith when faith brings blood. It is mistaken law that leads you to sacrifice. Life, woman, life is God's most precious gift. No principle, however glorious, may justify the taking of it. I beg you, woman, prevail upon your husband to confess. Let him give his lie. Quail not before God's judgment in this. For It may be well that God damns a liar less than he that throws his life away for pride. Will you plead with him? I cannot think of another he will listen to. Elizabeth says, quiet, with hatred. I think that be the devil's argument. Hail, says, woman, before the laws of God, we are as swine. We cannot read his will. Elizabeth sincerely said, I cannot dispute you, sir. I lack the learning for it. Danforth, irritated, says, Goody Proctor, you are not summoned here for disputation, but is there no wifely tenderness within you? He will die with the sunrise. You are her husband. Do you understand it? What say you? Will you contend with him? She is silent, staring at him. Are you stoned? I tell you what, true, woman. Had I no proof of your unnatural life, your dry eyes would now be sufficient evidence that you've delivered your soul to hell. A very ape would weep for such calamity. Has the devil dried up any tear of pity within you? She is silent. Take her out. It profit nothing that I should speak to her. She should speak to him. And Elizabeth says, let me speak with him, Excellency. Paris says with hope, you'll strive with him? And she hesitates. Danforth, will you plead for a confession or will you not? And Elizabeth says, I promise nothing. Let me speak with him. And then they bring in John, and he looks like another man. His wrists are chained. He is bearded, filthy, eyes misty as webs have overgrown them. He halts inside the doorway, his eye caught by the sight of Elizabeth. The emotion flowing between them prevents anyone from speaking for an instant. Hale looks upstage. Proctor crosses down slowly toward Elizabeth, looking around. Then Hale speaks. And Hale says, pray, leave him, Excellency. Danforth, as Paris and Cheever rise. Mr. Proctor, you have been notified, have you not? Proctor is silent. He is just staring at Elizabeth. I see light in the sky, mister. Let you counsel with your wife, and may God help you turn your back on hell. Proctor is silent, staring at Elizabeth. Danforth exits. Cheever follows, and Hawthorne. Paris says, if you desire a cup of cider, Mr. Proctor, I am sure. Proctor turns, an icy stare as he breaks off. Paris raises his palm towards him. God lead you now. And Paris leaves. And then Elizabeth says, you have been chained? And then Proctor, of course, he's like, I, the child? So he's asking her about her pregnancy. She's 3 months along by now. She says it gross. And Proctor says, there's no word of the boys. And Elizabeth responds, they're well. Rebecca's Daniel keeps them. Proctor, you have not seen them? Elizabeth says, I have not. Proctor says, you are a marvel, Elizabeth. They come from my life now. And Elizabeth says, I know. Proctor says, none have yet confessed? Well, and Elizabeth says, well, there's many that have confessed. And Proctor says, who are they? Well, there be 100 or more. There be 100 or more, they say. Goody Ballard is one. Isaiah Goodkind is the other. There be many. And that is where we will leave. So we're going to see if Elizabeth can talk John out of dying for pride, because he cares about his name a lot. And he'd rather die claiming innocence than, confess to witchcraft, knowing that his boys will have to carry around the reputation that their father was a witch. All right, so I will see some of you tomorrow. The other group, this will be due no later than, I would say Friday. And we'll read the end of the play tomorrow, and I'll post that as well. Remember that test on Tuesday, okay? And have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.